The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you for tuning in. We're going to go through the new eligibility requirements this morning. Some of you have heard some of this before because I did a real brief overview of the new policies at the conference we did last week, but we're going to be going into a little bit more detail this morning, so I'm glad that you are back here. We will make this webinar available on our Children's Services Division website. We're going to be recording, and this will go up after we are finished this morning. So if some of your staff are not able to tune in right now, we would still like everybody to watch this at some point so we're all on the same page in terms of how we're going forward with the new requirements. So even if it looks the same when we start out, we're going to have some new material for you this morning. We'll be monitoring the little webinar display for questions. So you are all on mute right now, but if you have questions as we go through the material, you enter them through the chat window, and we will we'll get to them as we can get to them. So thanks a lot for joining us this morning.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Anybody have a question?
Screen. Start the thing. Okay, so first thing you should notice here is that these changes are in effect. We have a new regs in effect beginning March 12th, so that was more than a month ago. And we are now working through doing the required training, which is part of that. So you guys are sort of covered by being part of this presentation this morning, but we need everybody out there who works with eligibility or is in any kind of management role to complete the training within 90 days of the beginning of the rule, which is June 10th. And I'll tell you that again later. Just want to make sure everyone is on the same page. So everyone who is enrolled from March 12th afterwards, we need to make sure that documentation is in place for those people that meets the standards, so that if we are audited, monitored, reviewed, and so on, that our records reflect the Head Start policies that are in effect. So that's the date that you need to know. Children whose enrollment date was before March 12th are grandfathered in under the old set of rules, and as long as you have a valid HSED and so on, you're good. All right, so why are there new eligibility requirements for the Head Start and Early Head Start programs? When you understand where we're coming from, you'll kind of get why these rules are in place and what they mean. So what you're looking at right now, this is basically what we're going to go through in the webinar. We're going to start with why, what kind of documentation you have to have, and that's the big pieces. After that, we'll go through changes in definitions, the required policy on violations, and the training requirements that everyone's going to be held to. So, okay. So the reason that we are doing this, the reason we came into a situation where the feds felt like they had to increase sort of the documentation burden for eligibility, is that based on some anonymous phone calls that were made to federal fraud hotlines and so on, the General Accounting Office did fraud investigation throughout a number of states. Illinois was not one of those states, but a number of states in the East Coast and South had secret shopper kind of people who investigated the Head Start programs. And what they did is they attempted to enroll fictitious children. But they went in with documentation, and the documentation clearly showed that they were not eligible for Head Start. Income was too high and so on. And what they discovered was that in 8 instances, staff at the centers they were investigating fraudulently misrepresented information, told them essentially how to get around the requirements, didn't include some income, lied about their status, and so on to say that they were eligible for the program. This was a concern to the feds because obviously they weren't eligible for the benefits. It wasn't an allowable expense, but also a lot of the programs had waiting lists, at least in theory, so that it was felt that the program is targeted to serve certain parts of the population, low income, the neediest families, and instead other people were being allowed to enroll in the program. So as a result of that, it's taken 5 years, but HHS has developed new regulations, tighter regulations about how agencies are to show that the children who are enrolled in the program are eligible for the program. So the biggest requirement, the big piece, and the simplest piece that everybody all over needs to be able to know that has changed and recite and describe how they do it is just that programs must now keep eligibility determination records for each participant. Okay, they're also required to keep training records, and this can be, and at some point will be, an electronic record. But the key requirement here is that they have to have the record. Now, those of you, there's probably 2 groups of people in Head Start Chicago right now. Some of you are also working with the child care program, so you kind of know what this is like. When you enroll kids in child care, you have to have certain things on file. Typically, you need the check stubs that were used for income verification, and so on. So this is a very similar requirement. Previously in Head Start, all we had to do was say, hey, we reviewed documentation, this kid's eligible, you sign that statement, it's cool. Now, if it says we reviewed documentation, that documentation needs to be in the folder. So what are they looking for then when they look in the folder to see that it's documented? They want to see a statement that program staff has made reasonable efforts to verify information by conducting an in-person interview. So you've done that. That's part of everybody's process, essentially. Describing efforts to verify eligibility. Okay, and in cases where the family reports no income, documentation of efforts to obtain third-party verification. So everyone should review this themselves. There's obviously lots and lots of pages of text on this like there is everywhere. But essentially this is what they're saying. When someone reviews your folder, your eligibility folder, they should be able to reconstruct the story. All right, so this is why you see why they're eligible. What did they look at? How does that show that they're eligible? So
yeah. I'm just going to give an example. So, mother comes in. I know I'm busy as an FSW. I'm doing about 10,000 things. But isn't it important that I do that HSCV and verify, get the check stubs or anything else that mother has? Get that information and do that right away. Don't put it off.
Yeah, this is an important part about this because timing has a lot to do with having a valid record of documentation. So the regs, these are new. The regs have always stated that a child's eligibility for the program must be determined before they're enrolled. So what this means is that when someone comes in, you verify income, you need to produce the HSEV at that time. The information on the HSEV must match the information in the eligibility documentation. So if you have an HSEV and they're enrolled, and the HSEV says family receives TANF, so they're categorically eligible. Something with their TANF ID on it must be in their folder.
And the document age, birth certificate.
Right, so something that documents that should all be. You may have that in one place, by the way. You may have something that says this is a letter, they have TANF, this is the child, date of birth is this. That's great.
And now we don't want original. We want copies. Because I know somebody's going to have that.
Yeah, you know, this is because we're now keeping important, sensitive information, they may need this to show eligibility for other programs and so on, so it's not necessary to take and keep their original document for all time. But we like a copy of it just to show this is what we used to verify. And we are more or less covered on some of the stuff with the HSEV, but you may see the language change a little bit going forward, just to kind of quote more from their language from the regs so that it's clear. This is what we're attempting to show.
A few questions.
Okay, so let me see.
How do you do third-party verification for a parent?
How do you do? We're coming to that. That will be covered going forward. If you still don't understand it, then ask that. Can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? Yeah, we'll post that along with the webinar itself. Okay. So
that brings us to family statement.
Okay, it does. So if you have a family that doesn't have proof of income or is making a statement that says, let's say, I have no income or we're homeless, sometimes that's been difficult to demonstrate. So we can accept a family member's written declaration that states that they don't have income or can't prove it.
So let me elaborate a little about what I'd like to see for a family statement. I know some of you are using templates, and if that template involves mother just coming in and signing off and dating, you need to remember that this needs to be authentic. Doesn't matter if mother doesn't spell correctly. She needs to be able to write in her own language if she is receiving any income or if she is not, if there's zero income. So if you have questions about that, I know the PDM or CN team will be out and they will be verifying a lot of what we're going through, and we'll give you more guidance. But those templates, no.
Right. When they talk about the verification process and the eligibility process, they really want, again, a story about how they were determined to be eligible. So if you have 10 families there who all have come in and said they have no income, you can't just have the same signed statement for them all saying this one has no income, this one has no income. So we need to know something about their circumstances, first of all. So they haven't starved to death, so somehow they are probably fed and sheltered somehow. Something should be like that, even if it's, you know, I have no income, right, I'm staying with my Uncle Joe, and so on, but it should say that specifically. Secondly, you're required to make reasonable efforts to verify the family's eligibility. Now, there's a big caveat to that, and we'll get to that in a minute. But in general, you're required to try to verify the family's eligibility. So when they say, I don't have any income, I'm staying with Uncle Joe, what does a verification of that look like? Typically, it looks like you call or write to Uncle Joe and say, Debbie came in and said that she's staying with you and has no income. Can you verify that that's true? You may not always be able to do that, but even if you're not able to reach them, you're not, when they develop this policy, you look through the release that's in the Federal Register, and you'll see that people wrote in and say, we have limited staff time, we can't be hunting this stuff down all year. They understand that, but if you call them and couldn't reach them, the eligibility documentation should say, we tried to call Uncle Joe and couldn't reach him.
And in your case,
yeah.
reasonable efforts.
Okay, so, let me see. You're saying we should not be using a form to document zero income. That's correct. Yeah, we are saying that. You could, or let me say, there's not any form out there that I've seen that meets the new requirement. You could have a thing that had space for you to put the narrative. So it would say, how did you attempt to verify income? You would say, I called Uncle Joe, and he said that they live in his basement. Okay, but just a form statement that is signed and dated but says the same thing in every case, it doesn't, right, it's not authentic, exactly, and it doesn't show how they were eligibility, how you determined it, and how you verified it. That information isn't there.
And every family is different, like you said before. That puts the federal review onto something. If they come in and they see the same statement over and over and over for families, it has to be their story. Okay, any more questions about that?
Yeah.
So you want to call employers who write statements of income?
Okay, do you want us to call employers who write statements of income? Again, yes, but with a big caveat that we're going to come to soon. So in most cases, and there are exceptions, and we'll tell you why when we get there. But the parent does not want us to contact anyone. That is a very good question, and we'll talk about that going forward. But you do need consent. So if they say they won't give consent, you will note that, and there are reasons why you would do that.
And again, if we see that over and over and over again, it only leads to suspicion. So we're trying to get you to be in a place where you're having conversations with families, either face to face or you're catching them as they come in. But we don't want to see a lot of repetition.
Could I have one? It's more of a comment. This is a violation of privacy. Again, we do need to get consent, but people do not have any kind of legal right to falsely represent themselves for federal benefits. That just doesn't exist. Can we accept a written statement from a parent in their own language, for example, Spanish? Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So this is where we're getting into the details of it. Third-party verification. Required documentation includes the family's written consent to contact each third party. So again, they have to say, it's okay for you to contact my employer. It's okay for you to contact Uncle Joe. If they don't agree to that, there are definitely reasons why we would accept that. Again, we'll be coming to that soon. The third party's names, titles, and affiliations. So you would say Joe is the uncle that they're staying with. Bobby Jean is their employer at the Stan's Bagel Shop, so on. So it would, Jimmy's the caseworker at the shelter, right? So that it's not just random stuff, but you understand this is why we contacted this person. Okay, so if they have information, this could be, they could get written information from them. You can note, like writing a case note or someone, you can note, we talked to Joe, and Joe said they've been there since March, they got kicked out of their apartment, they had nowhere to go, something like that. Program staff must adhere to safety and privacy policy. So now we're getting there, and I'll get more to that in a minute, but in any case where the safety and security of the family is compromised by doing this, you're not required to do it. So you have situations ranging from family violence to will be put at risk of losing other benefits if this comes out, to I just started this job, the people at the job don't know that whatever, that we're also
yeah, we're talking about reasonable effort. We don't want you policing, right. But you do need to ask.
Yeah, and this is said later in the presentation as well. But you have to understand that the reason they're doing this, it's not the families that are under suspicion. It's you that they don't trust. Right? So it's not, I would say that bluntly. So it's not that you have to have an inquisition with the families. They didn't have an investigation and say, families are coming in and saying they're eligible for Head Start, but they weren't. That's not what they said. What they said was, agencies are misrepresenting eligibility, essentially. So this is about your documentation. That's not even necessarily beyond a certain point that you're doing more. It's just you're writing it down, saying this is how we verify that they were eligible. Okay, so what needs to be included in the parent's written statement? Essentially, this is a question coming over the web here. Essentially, because what we're talking about is documenting eligibility, we want a statement that explains why they're eligible for the program. So if I don't have any income, they would say that, and a little bit more, because you would ask questions, because again,
this is the interview.
Right, it's an interview. You want to get a little bit more about the situation. So I don't have any income. I'm living with Uncle Joe right now. That's how we eat. Whatever. I mean, there's your. It's not that in depth there.
And a signature.
Right. And again, we have the question: what if calling the shelter causes a safety concern to the family? Then you don't call the shelter, and your documentation says we didn't call the shelter because the family thought it was a safety concern, and that's more important. Again, it's you that there is under suspicion, not the family. So if you just say this is why we didn't do it, it's a reasonable concern, it's okay. If we have check stubs or other income that are routinely accepted for CCAP, we would not have to verify those. That's correct, because the check stubs themselves are a verification of income. So what we are saying now is that if they showed what their income is by bringing in check stubs and proof of income, that when we look in that folder, we need to see that now. So rather than just assign HSEB.
And I'm glad you asked that question, because I think you mentioned this earlier, but I don't think it hurts. Since people are talking about child care and Head Start, what we would suggest, we can't tell you how to maintain your record-keeping system, but what we suggest is that you have Head Start documents separated from child care. It makes it much easier. If the feds were to do a surprise audit, they don't need to look at all of the child care documents. All they need to look at is what's in the Head Start folder. And I'm sure is far less information that's in the Head Start folder. What if the family is staying in a domestic violence? Do we answer that?
We kind of did, but let's do that again. Yeah, if the family is staying in a domestic violence shelter, there are reasons why they don't disclose information about people who are staying there for client safety. So you would just note that in the file that they're at a shelter that won't disclose information, and that's valid. That statement by you has to be in the file, though.
And make sure it's in your case notes.
Okay, clarify. If we receive a written statement from a third party, the staff still need to call and verify. No, they do not. The written statement is valid. You can cover that. Just include that in the eligibility file.
But let's say anything that you may be wary or suspicious about, it's good to be able to have that opportunity and that consent from the family to check with Uncle Joe if you need to. All right? All right.
Okay. So the next piece is when you're talking about categorical eligibility. Now, when you have categorical eligibility, mostly what these requirements are referring to specifically is homelessness. It's pretty clear. There are other kinds of categorical eligibility. Tender for SSI, but again, it's pretty easy to demonstrate eligibility or enrollment in those things. They have a case number, and so on. Foster. And we'll get to foster in a minute. They've gotten a new definition of foster child, and it is so broad that essentially any kid who's got a DCFS case is categorically eligible. So you don't need a lot. You need to show that they have a DCFS ID, basically. But we'll get into more detail with that. So we're really talking about homelessness when they get into categorical eligibility. And what they want, because homelessness is defined by the McKinney-Vento Act, which is pretty broad. They want to know how is the family homeless. So what I mean by that is that can mean they're in a shelter, in which case you can say they're in a shelter. That also means they could be forced to live with relatives or friends because they lost their housing. It could say, so you would say that. So not just I'm homeless, but this is the way that I am homeless. So, and again, we're looking at a sentence or two. It's not that complicated. They just want to be able to look at the record. If you have an HSEV that says they're homeless, you need to look in the record and see how are they homeless. That's all. And again, the McKinney-Vento Act is also pretty broad. There are a number of types of homelessness, so to speak. Again, describe efforts to verify eligibility. So if they're a type of homelessness that isn't like you know what that means when they're living in a shelter. But if you have a type of homelessness that is we lost our housing and moved in with Aunt Bertha temporarily, and this is where all three of us are staying in her extra bedroom, you just write that down. So then to verify eligibility in that case, you would talk to Aunt Bertha or get a statement from her, something like that. And again, and we talked about this before, but what they're looking for is a narrative from you that says this is their status, this is how we know that this is their status. So that's not just a form that says we verify this family is homeless, a signature, but it's also not an epic Russian novel. Right? It says the family was homeless. They said they were staying with Cousin Joe. We called Cousin Joe. She said they're staying with him. That's it. That was 3 sentences. Then a signature and a date, and put that in the file. So, okay. Next. Okay, so this is where the caveat. I said there was a big caveat, and there's a caveat. Remember that the people under suspicion is us, not the family. So this means in people in challenging situations, this is specifically referring to families in a domestic violence shelter, families who recently lost their housing, families may be coming in other situations. There may be things, violence, chemical dependency, legal problems, other kinds of things that are complicating matters for families. And so specifically try to work with them and get what you need, but don't, remember that it's your record keeping and your documentation that we want to get better here, and so don't hit the family over the head with it. The second one is very clear, and again, this is why I was saying about, to respond to the questions earlier about the domestic violence shelter, do not place families at risk of harm. So if that means both that they may be physically harmed, or that having you poke around and ask people questions would cause them other problems in their life, problems with their employer, problems, with their whatever kind of temporary housing they have and so on, then you don't want to do it because it's not worth that. And if you have a couple sentences on a piece of paper in their file that says this is how they presented as eligible, this is why we weren't able to contact anyone, it's fine as long as it's documented. As just before, there would have been nothing there, and you would then verbally explain that situation to the reviewer, and now they want it in writing. And that's really the way to think about this. It's not so much that there's a huge change to the rule. And before, you would when you were being reviewed, you would just tell the story sitting there, and it wouldn't be in the file. Now it needs to be in the file, and whatever story you tell them needs to be lined up exactly with what they're looking at. Okay. So the third one is you're working with families. Again, nothing about third-party verification indicates that you're going around behind their back and calling their aunt, and you're like, I know her and her whatever. Her cousin went to school with me, let me call her. No. All right.
It just sounds like to me that we're getting back to old-fashioned case management. We're working with the family. We're interviewing the family. If the family needs to make any calls while we're there, that's what Head Start is about. That's what we're supposed to do.
Okay. So let's clarify again. If there's a third-party statement, are we calling? And again, if you have a statement in writing from a third party, it's acceptable. That is third-party verification. Put it in the file. You don't also need to call them. This could be, so let me just be clear. This could be when you're contacting someone else. This could be a phone call. This could be a written contact. This could be email. Okay?
This could be Uncle Joe who came to the interview with Mother, and you just get his signature as well.
Okay, how about someone starting a new job is the question. We use an employee verification form, which is standard and accepted by CCAP. Is it okay to use that? So I guess this means they haven't been paid yet, but this is something that says how much they're going to be paid. I guess if it's accepted by CCAP, probably. I don't want to answer that question in general. I think this should be, the form in specific should be discussed with your PDM person. Probably, I can imagine one that would be acceptable. For that matter, if someone has just started a job and hasn't been paid yet, for Head Start verification, you would probably enroll them as no income.
Right. Why wouldn't you get the statement? The statement is going to back you up.
So, yeah.
If eventually they do go on and get the job, that's fine.
Okay. Even if we have separate files, the child care application is generated through COPA shows the income eligibility based on current income documentation. Yeah, it is. The question is for the agency who just received the EHS slot. When print out the child application for the EHS file, the existing income will show. Do we use income documentation consistent with the income shown on the child app, or do we get current documentation? If we get current documentation on income, it will be in conflict. Okay, there is actually a big conflict that goes on between child care and Head Start, and that's because child care redetermines eligibility more frequently. It has current information on file, whereas you make an eligibility determination with Head Start or early Head Start, and it sticks. That's why we would have separate files as at least a very highly recommended way to do things. So when someone is starting now in early Head Start, you need to make a determination that they are eligible. Now, Early Head Start, it's a different system, again, than child care. So if you look at just the Early Head Start regs, you can base eligibility on lots of things. It could be last year's tax returns, right? They come in a statement that says, this is what we paid for 2014. It shows us below the poverty line. This is what we didn't pay, most likely. But this is our return. It says we didn't need to pay taxes. It says our income was $18,000. So for our family size, poverty line is 23. So we're eligible, and you're fine with that. For child care, it's got to be, you're doing an application or a RED, it's got to be like the 2 most recent checks. So that doesn't have to be the case with Early Head Start. It just has to tell a story that describes the family circumstances and eligibility. So it makes sense that you may have different information. The problem comes in working with COPA is that if you have current information that's different than check stubs you got a long time ago, the HSEV is going to show current information. So if you never did a Head Start eligibility verification before, then you need to do one now and generate HSEV that has information that agrees with your documentation.
Absolutely, and you need to do that at enrollment, not after the fact, because you get busy and you forget things. So this is, like we said, all of this needs to be implemented as soon as possible, but definitely by June 10th.
Yes.
So let's start now.
Okay. Yes, I answered this a minute ago, but again, to be clear so everyone hears, is it okay to have a written statement by a parent in their preferred language? Yes, it is. There's nothing in the reg that says anything about what language the statement is in. So if the family's only really literate in Amharic and they write you a statement in Amharic, that is fine.
Absolutely.
And again, to be able to communicate with family and to understand what's there, that's responsibility of the program, not the parent.
Exactly.
If a family is going to school but has no income, do they still need to write a zero income letter? Yes. We need a letter, and because again, they want to know the details of eligibility. It just should not just say they have no income. It should say, I'm a full-time student and I have no income. There you go. How recent or how old can documents be for Head Start eligibility? That's always been in 1305, but because not only the only thing you can use isn't just current check stubs. So if you have other kinds of information, if you get tax information, W-2s, and so on, then that obviously that's not for last year.
And for 1 year after.
Right. So the requirement on time is more how long you have to keep it. And obviously you need to keep that information as long as they're enrolled and a year afterwards. In terms of the age of the documentation, I think people are asking this because you have children who are currently enrolled in child care, and you want to know if you can use the check stubs that you use to determine eligibility for child care in October to determine eligibility for Head Start, or do you need new check stubs?
No. Once the eligibility determined, workers have been determined for those currently enrolled.
I'm not sure I would want to give you a specific date, but if they have a child care case that is ongoing right now and they were determined eligible, and those check stubs also show poverty level income, which means they would be Head Start eligible, then those would be acceptable. So that DFS auditors and reviewers will be okay with a statement in the parent's preferred language. Yes, yes, they will. Okay. What if the student is a teen parent?
You need to say more about that.
Right. Yeah, we need to talk more. I'm not actually the.
You need to say more about that. Just write us back.
Right. We need to know more about that situation because there isn't really a specific eligibility criteria for teenagers as opposed to older families. There is, but again, there is specific criteria regarding homelessness, so we just need to know more about the family. Okay. What's next in here? Okay, speaking about which, there's a definition of family that is included in the Head Start regs, and if you look on your HSEV that's generated by COPA, the definition of family is there. The only change here has to do with what the definition of family is when you're enrolling a pregnant woman. Now, we're going to review the whole thing right now because this kind of just makes things clear on some of these other questions as well. So family is defined as all persons who are, first of all, living in the same household. Secondly, supported by the child's parents or guardian's income. So if you have another adult, who isn't living in the household anymore, or is not supported by the child's parents' income, they're not a member of the family. Okay. Next, related to the child's parents or guardians by blood, marriage, or adoption. So this means my old high school buddy who's crouching on the couch also is not a family member for determining eligibility. But if he's my brother and I'm supporting him, he is. Clear? Okay, the child's authorized caregiver or legally responsible party. So this means we just said parents are guardians, but operationally, if she's staying with grandma, that's grandma. If staying with Uncle Pete, that's Uncle Pete, right? It's whoever is the responsible party for the child. Okay, this is what the change is. When the feds did their eligibility webinar, they were pretty murky about how this will work in practice. What they did say, okay, a family for a pregnant woman means all persons who financially support the pregnant woman. And the key kind of where they walked away from this in the federal webinar is they made it clear that financially means money, right? So if they give money to the woman to live, if she has no income but is financially supported by someone else, then that person is part of the family and they count. Both the income counts and the person's count. However, but financially means money. It doesn't mean food or housing. So that's how they walked away from it. So if the mom is living with her family, this is why I said I needed to know more about the teen parent. Whether she's a teen or not is not actually the point. If mom is living with her mom, but isn't financially supported, other than she has a place to sleep and they feed her dinner, that doesn't count. So they're not part of the family size in determining eligibility because they're not supported by the child's parents or guardians, and the support that they're receiving is what we would call in-kind rather than financial. So they said a thing, and I think they then felt that they went too far with it, and they're walking away from it, basically. But that's what we're talking about. Okay. And again, so this is the question. If a teen parent living with her family, we count the parent's income or include her parents in the family size. It's tricky, but essentially not if she's not receiving financial support. they're just taking care of her, then no, because they're not dependent on her income.
And again, this is stuff that comes out in the interview. And I really do think that the feds are looking to see if we're having a sit down with families to get probe and get more information.
Okay. So how old date can we accept a written statement from a third party? That's not really covered by the regs. I would say reasonable. And you can figure out what reasonable means. So 5 years old, no. Last week, certainly. And then when you get in between there, you have to use some judgment. What documentation should be obtained for a teen parent who lives at home with their mom? Does she need an income letter or just a school schedule? School enrollment, this is kind of where we got the two programs that messed up. School enrollment makes you child care eligible. There is nothing in the Head Start regs that I have ever seen about school. So in order to show that she's eligible, she needs something saying she doesn't have any income. All right, she needs that school schedule for child care eligibility, service eligibility, but Head Start doesn't care. What if they're supporting grandparents who live overseas or in another house and are dependents according to IRS rules? The reg is pretty clear that they're living in the same household. All right. One thing, the exception to that living in the same household thing, to be clear, is if you pay child support out. This is child support specifically. It's not voluntary support of relatives. But if you are paying child support out to another family, that is subtracted from your income. The COPA does that automatically if you put the money in their line. So if I make $600 a month and I pay $100 a month in child support, then my income is $500 a month for Head Start purposes. Because that child support is the other family's income, not mine. Okay, foster care. They made a more detailed definition of this, just to be clear, because children who are considered to be in foster care are categorically eligible, just like homeless kids, just like people on TANF or SSI. So this means 24-hour substitute care for children placed away from their parents or guardians and for whom the state agency has placement and care responsibility. So DCFS has placed the child somewhere that's not with their birth parents. And that's pretty broad, so that they're clear. It includes your traditional foster parents, also when you've been placed with a relative, when you're in a group home, you've been taken from the home when you're in an emergency shelter, got a residential facility for a variety of circumstances. You know, I've been home for boys who are out of the juvenile system, all kinds of things, and it can be even in a home that they're working to adopt the child, but that hasn't happened yet. All of those cases, right. All of those statements could count as foster care, and they're categorically eligible, but we need to have a statement in their file that says this child lives at the Boys and Girls Group Home. They're placed there by DCFS. It's a foster case. They're categorically eligible. And you would have some kind of documentation in folder to that effect. Like, my name's Jenny. I'm Malcolm's caseworker, and he lives at this home. That's right. That's all. Okay. So, again, just making sure it's broader. It's child in any of these circumstances is a foster child, whether it's licensed or not, whether they're currently receiving payments from DCFS or not, whether they're having adoption subsidy payments or not. All of those things The money isn't the point. The fact is that they're not with their parents. It's a DCFS case. They're eligible. Okay. Here is, again, we're getting back to what we said earlier about treating families in challenging circumstances with respect. They specifically singled out homeless families and said, if a child is determined to be categorically eligible because they're homeless, it has to allow them to participate in the program while they pull together other stuff. So homeless families, think about this for a minute. A homeless family who's been on the street, who's coming in from the shelter, and you're like, we need to see the child's birth certificate. Well, they probably don't have that on them right now. Okay, so you need to be able to give them a reasonable time and work with them to get that information. So this applies to having a physical, having other kinds of things like that. It just doesn't mean you can enroll them and they don't need those things.
Right.
That means you can enroll them and you have to help them get those things. The second thing is, if you look at the first part, if a program determines a child is categorically eligible. So this has to do with other paperwork requirements. It does not have to do with the determination of eligibility. This kicks in once you've determined eligibility. You still need to determine someone's eligibility when they walk in the door, before they start services and have an HSED. Okay, so let's see. I'm sure that generated questions that we have. When is a sufficient time frame to obtain the required documentation from homeless families? You know,
reasonable time.
They said reasonable. So what that means, look, I needed a birth certificate for something. You can request it from the office, and they're like, this may take up to 2 weeks. If it's going to take up to 2 weeks for them to get it to you, then you got to give them the 2 weeks.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's what it means. However, if it says you can get it to you in 2 weeks, you don't have to give them 6 months. I mean,
reasonable.
Right.
And remember, you're writing this up in your case notes, and you're following up with the family. That's what Head Start is all about.
Okay. Second, for a child to be considered a foster child, the placement must be through DCFS, correct? Can you think of another circumstance?
No.
I can't think of anything.
Only DCFS and CPD are the only two agencies that can remove or place, but it would come through DCFS.
What about families that receive an adoption subsidy? Do we have DCFS ID? I think you put this question in here before we got to that part on the PowerPoint. But yes, they still count. Oh, do we count that income? No, we don't count the income because they're categorically eligible for Head Start because they're a foster case. So the categorical eligibility supersedes income. So if they're homeless, they're a foster case, they receive SSI or TANF, they're eligible, and the income isn't considered as part of the Head Start eligibility. How do we meet DCFS licensing requirement, which requires us to have a physical before the child starts if the family is homeless?
Well, this is where you work with your case manager. Work with that case manager in order to obtain the necessary documents. And write in your case notes all along. Again, we're looking at reasonable efforts to be able to do this.
And I would say, I want to point out too that lots of programs that we have that work specifically with homeless families are home-based programs, and this is always an option. You can begin to deliver services to a family. A family can be enrolled, and they're not necessarily attending. So what you do with that family, if you feel that you can't have them on site, is send someone to meet with them and work with them to get this stuff. Take them to your community partners get what you need to get. If you try to get a birth certificate from another state, but you still haven't gotten it, the family is homeless. My family paid for it. That's allowable. I also point out that when we are using the term birth certificate, but that's almost shorthand. When you have to determine age eligibility, the birth certificate is not the only thing that you can use. If they do have a physical and it has the child's birth date on it, if they have school records,
anything that's signed by another regulatory agency.
So
if the doctor signs the physical.
Right. If you have any kind of documentation of age, and this is especially important because it's one thing to get a birth certificate from another state. All right. Getting a birth certificate from Utah is probably going to be easier than getting one from Guatemala. All right. So in cases like that, you need to have another way to verify age. Okay. But essentially, this is why they included special sort of carve-out in the regs for homeless kids. Nothing in these regs should be used to make it harder for a homeless family to enroll in Head Start or Early Head Start. They really, in fact, want to be focusing the program on the most vulnerable families, on the lowest income families. And those are often the people that have the most trouble coming up with documentation. Secondly, staff should work with them. Again, that's the big takeaway is you need to do an interview with the family. If they say, I can't get this or I can't get that, you need to problem solve with them and figure out how that can be accomplished and what you guys can do to help get that information.
And work these into your family goals. FSWs. You do this well.
Okay. So here's one of the last pieces. This is a big piece. And that is every agency needs to have a required policy on violations. And that means essentially these rules were created because the feds found that people at Head Start agencies were enrolling people intentionally who were ineligible. So you need to have a policy in place that says what happens when someone enrolls children who are not eligible. You have to work out what those consequences are going to be, and that needs to be approved by your governing bodies. And when you guys do training on eligibility, that policy needs to be included so that there's nobody who's working in the area of eligibility who could say, I did not know that there was a policy in place when I did this.
I did a certification with their signature that they've been through the training.
Okay. So you guys are the ones who directly enroll children and determine eligibility for children, so each agency needs to have its policy. We as a grantee have a policy on violations on ineligible enrollment, and in fact we've had one for a while, although we've rewritten it in response to these rules. But our policy is essentially that it's not an allowable expense for you to serve a family who is not properly determined to be eligible. And some of you out here know how this works because you have had us say we did a ERCIA review. These kids did not have appropriate eligibility determination. We found that they weren't eligible. They were enrolled as no income. And what we did and what we have done as a grantee is we retained funds for those kids. So if that center had 58 kids enrolled and we found that 3 of them were not properly enrolled, that they were ineligible and that they were determined to be eligible incorrectly, we have retained funds and we've only paid for 55 kids instead of 58. And that is still our policy. And again, we are restating that, but it's not a new policy, and I can think of several cases over the past 5 years when we have enforced that, and the essentially unpaid agencies for children who were over income and had been enrolled as income eligible. Yeah, it's a serious thing, because if we don't retain them from you, the feds can retain them from us and say that there was not an allowable expense on the grant. Yeah. Okay, again, this is what I just said. This is our policy: children whose eligibility is not determined in compliance with the regs is not an allowable expense. So this means for cases, it's always been so, but especially enrollment data after March 12th, if we find that they weren't eligible and that you said they were, either because they were stated to be homeless when they weren't, income was left off, so on, we can retain the funds for that child.
And if you're in doubt, always call your PDM or see a specialist, or call someone on the data team. Either or, we're here to help you. We want to keep you out of any violations, so call us beforehand and ask if you're not sure.
Okay, finally, a program has to train all governing body, policy council, management, and staff who determine eligibility on the applicable regulations and program policies and procedures.
Mm-hmm.
So, what does the training have to include? It has to include how you determine eligibility, how you collect information, and how you document it. It has to include how you, when we talk about strategies for treating families with dignity and respect, it has to specifically address basically what we've talked about before, issues of safety with domestic violence, how you determine eligibility, how you bring homeless people into the program and enable them to participate, and the fact that, again, we were the people that were under suspicion. We are not putting the family through an inquisition. We are just taking their statements and documenting that appropriately and following up as appropriate.
And then what consequences?
Right. And those consequences, the policy that you have about what happens when eligibility is done incorrectly and children are enrolled who shouldn't have been enrolled, staff need to be trained on those. You have to tell them this is the policy before you penalize anyone using the policy. Otherwise, you could be in for some hurt. Okay, so management staff and staff members who make eligibility determinations have to receive training within 90 days following the effective date of this rule. That is June 10th, because the effective date of the rule was March 12th. So everybody needs to have been certified as having been trained by June 10th. And then going forward, within 90 days of hiring new staff after the initial training is conducted. So let's say you do this training, you conduct this training on May 8th, and you get that's well before June 10th, you get all of your staff trained, and then you hire somebody else. They start May, what's the next Monday? 11th. Okay, so now you have 90 days from May 11th to train that person. And that rule will be in place going forward. So anytime someone is hired, they need to receive eligibility training within 90 days of their hire.
So they should just really look at making this a part of whatever their ongoing orientation.
There's nothing that says that you have to wait 90 days. Yeah. And they should probably be trained before they determine anybody's eligibility, right?
Absolutely. So
this is just part of the onboarding process.
Mm-hmm.
Can't believe I just used that ugly jargon. But there you go. We take into consideration child income received if the child is a foster child. Again, meaning the foster parent's income. No, you do not, because a foster child is categorically eligible. So once you mark, in specific terms using the COPA software, if under parental status you mark foster child, it's going to, or foster parent rather, it's going to override the income information, and when you enroll them, they are counted as eligible. The important thing to understand about that is that the parental status indicator is on the child's file. This means if you have a foster child and a biological child in the same family, the foster child is categorically eligible and the sibling isn't. Right? So this doesn't pertain to the whole family. This is the foster child. So that's how that system works. So you may have, and that's always true with Head Start because you've got such a long eligibility period, you can always have siblings who aren't both eligible. Just because the family was homeless when Jenny was 3, now Jenny's 4, her brother's 3, and they're not homeless. Jenny's still eligible, her brother's not necessarily. Okay. Next. Governing body and policy council members need to be trained within 180 days following the effective date of this rule, and within 180 days of the beginning of the term when new people come on board. I didn't do the math on that. It's obviously 90 days after June 10th. I think it's going to be September 8th, but we will get that information out. Just be done by the end of August and you'll be fine. But it's some date in early September. And if it is, it's going to hit just around the beginning of the new program year. So that wouldn't be that difficult to remember. Get it done before the new program year. There you go. A program must develop policies on how often training will be provided after the initial training. All right? So when you have a training plan, it will say periodically we will review eligibility policy. How often is that? I don't know, but if your policy states it, it's got to happen. So if you say we're going to do this every summer, you're going to do it every summer. Okay, so that's essentially our presentation. Things that you should take away from this are, I've said this a couple times, but they're not meant to make it more difficult for families to enroll. They are to make it more difficult for you. They suspect that kids are being enrolled who are not eligible. Again, there was never any finding that that happened in Illinois, but that's why the rule is in place. I also say, and we said this 5 years ago when the results of that investigation came out, that much fraud is actually poor documentation. Yes. In other words, you are not able to show how they were eligible. People didn't remember when we looked at some things before what had happened. So all we're doing is we're covering our bases here for something that's spelled very similarly by documenting how we determined eligibility. So if it says, you know, they're homeless, we've got a statement that says they're homeless. The advantage to this is that when you put that document in place, it's all there in the folder. There's never going to be any problem with an eligibility review because they pull the file, there's the information in the file, and they'll say, oh, okay, there's a letter, okay. That's what they did, they called them. So then they don't even have any questions for you because it's right there. So this whole thing could almost be summed up as write it down. It's a little more complicated than that, but not a lot. Write it down.
And write it down not just in the file, but in your case note. Keep yourself covered. Any other questions? All right. Liz, you have your hand raised. Your mic is on. Liz?
Elizabeth Rogers, you'd like to say something?
Your hand is up. Oh, okay. It's been a while. All right, well, if there aren't any other questions, then, oh, here we go. I'm going to see a copy of this PowerPoint. Yeah, so here's what's going to happen with this training, because you guys have to make sure all of your people are trained, and there's got to be a policy, which you may or may not have developed, included in that. So what we're going to do is make this available. First of all, we've been recording this webinar, and we're going to post that on the CSD website. You'll get sent out information about that when that goes up. And secondly, this PowerPoint we will include as well. We'll put both of those things on the net so that you can download them yourself and use them to the extent that you want to in any training going forward.
And in addition, as I mentioned before, the PDM ERCIA team is already providing technical assistance in this area. So call them. They're out there. If you have questions, let us know. We want to get ahead of this. And we are. I think we are. We're in good shape. All right. Well, we want to wrap this up and thank everyone.
Okay. And like I said, you have to do more training because we haven't covered your policy. However, if you want to, having viewed this webinar and participated here, you want to take attendance on the people that are here at your agency and say they were participated in the grantee eligibility training webinar. That's good. This was just an hour of continuing education for all of you guys. So.
And if you want to draft the policy and send it to us, we'd be more than happy to review it and give you some comments. Arla, was there one more? For pregnant income eligibility documents to verify.
Okay. Yeah, this is because it's shaky in COPA. I just want everybody to be clear on it. I should say this every time we talk about eligibility. In any circumstance, pregnant women need to have an HSEV. Their eligibility needs to be verified, just like everybody else's. So we do need to have information on file saying this is how we verified eligibility. This is why they're eligible. It should match their HSEV.
Again, we want to thank you all for joining us, and please be in touch with us as we roll this out. Thank you.